PCG first got data asset support back in 5.4. Since then, the interface has changed for PCG, and now with 5.8, we have been introduced to array support. And that also means struct support. Now, while you could absolutely still use that video, there's a lot of stuff that you can now have access to that you couldn't really before. Namely, you can now very easily not only get the arrays, but pretty much anything you want. You can do a struct and a struct if you want, and get the full information as just one attribute. So in this tutorial, I kind of want to show you guys how to set up a data asset for PCG, make use of it, and be able to access not only your top level information, your variables, but also information inside of a struct, and maybe information inside of a struct and struct, and maybe in an array. So you will be able to then, for your organization, put whatever in whatever and just use it all together and then swap out the data asset, which is the beauty of it. So that way you might have a scenario where you have different themes and data assets and you'll be able to swap them out and have them be all organized and be easily read in PCG. So with all of that out of the way, let me show you how to set up the data asset and how to read all of that information inside of PCG. To get started here, I'm going to right click, go to Blueprint, and select Structure. We first need a structure, which is going to house all of our variables that we want. For demonstration, I will call this one s_main struct, and I'll also duplicate it and call the second one s_substruct. So what I'm going to show you guys is putting one structure into another, into the data asset, etc. So you can pretty much have any scenario you want. Let's go ahead and open up the substruct first, and here we'll have access to the variables. All I'm going to do is just set up a simple one here. I'll rename the name here to booleans, and I'm just going to change these to be an array of booleans. That's all it's going to be. I don't need to put anything in here. That's good enough. So this one will be our kind of substruct so that we can see that, yes, we can put in more, but this will show you how to read the information. And now in the main struct, we can open that one up, and then we can go ahead and call this one substruct. And the type here is going to be s_substruct, right? So this is the struct that we just made, and it's going to be of this type. And we can also make this one an array. We can have an array of these structs as a variable inside of this struct. In fact, let's go ahead and add a few more. Let's just have one for floats, for example. We just add one for floats, and maybe one more for ints or integers, right? The point of this is to show you how to read all this information. What the information is for this tutorial doesn't matter, really. The point is, how do you read this data? How do you access it? Make it simple. Let's say this is all we need. So now we have this struct. So how do we now set it up? Well, we need to create a data asset. But for that, we need something else first. So I'm going to right click, go to Blueprint Class, and under All Classes, search for Primary, because we need first a Primary Data Asset, or PDA. Go ahead and select it. I just called it PDA for Primary Data Asset _ Data Asset Base. It's just called that just so you guys know that this is the data asset base. You need this file to create the data assets from. But in here, we now can specify the variables we wanted to have. Well, we wanted to have the variable of a struct. We want to have that struct. So we'll just say main struct as the variable name, and type here is s_main struct. And again, I'll make it an array. Why not? And then you know what? Let's add another one that's going to be separate entirely. And this one's just going to be named static meshes, and I'll give it a name of static mesh object reference. All right, so we'll have an array of static meshes. Inside the main struct, we have a bunch of other stuff. We're going to compile this. So now we have a data asset with structs and structs and structs and arrays and all of the good stuff. So now we can actually right click, go to data, and right here under data asset, the one on the bottom, just data asset is all we need. And this is where we specify what kind of primary data asset we're going to be using. So we're using PDA _ data asset base. Let's go ahead and select it. Now we can call this DA example A, because you can have now multiple of these to swap them out. We'll just open it up and you'll see here, there's our main struct, there's our static meshes. We can go ahead and press plus on them, right, and get access to all the variables. We can go ahead and add in a bunch of meshes, for example, here. All right, let's just go with something like this. And here you can see inside of our main struct, there's our substruct. We can add information for it. There's our booleans, right? We can add a few. Let's turn a few of them on. Let's add a few floats and a few integers just to have this place populated. Let's say something like this is all we wanted in this data asset. The beauty of the data asset, of course, is the fact that you can just make another one. You can even duplicate the current one and then just clear it out. And then maybe on this one, you'll have a different setup. Maybe on this one, you just have the cube with socket, a single boolean that just says true, couple of floats, and a few ints, right? A little bit different of a setup. And we can call it, for example, example B. So the point is, these are going to be very interchangeable, and you can swap this information out really easily. But that's all the data asset stuff, right? This just allows us to have a struct inside of data assets. And now let's go ahead and set this up inside of the actual PCG graph and figure out how to read this. So for that, we just right click, go to procedural, go to PCG graph. We'll create an empty graph. We don't need anything here. I'll just call it something like PCG_read data assets. I'll just go ahead and just drag it into the world. So that way we have access to it and the debugging, and I'll open it up. So here we are inside of PCG, and it's very simple actually to read all this. Inside of the graph parameters here, we can just add a new parameter, and then we just left click on the capsule here, and the type of variable we need is a primary data asset, not a regular data asset. You want a primary data asset, which is the first one we made. That's this guy here, not the actual examples and the actual variables that you kind of set up for yourself. We want this one, the PDA one. So if I go ahead and select it and use an object reference here, and now I'll just press F2 to rename it to data asset, so we know what it is. And now here in the dropdown, you'll see, oh, there's our two examples. So I can go ahead and select one of those. By the way, you can absolutely do PDA data asset base for your variable type. If you do it specifically for that, then you'll only get access to those data assets. So you can do primary data asset to get any kind of data asset or the specific one you created. In most cases, you're probably going to want the specific one, but I want to show that you can allow for any data asset. And then depending on what kind of data asset and kind of information it has, maybe you see what it has. Because maybe there's a scenario where you have a couple of different primary data asset setups, but they have overlapping variables. In which case, you might be able to use the same ones as long as they're in the same location and called the same thing. But now we have this data asset, so now I just click and drag this out into the world, and now we have this. If I press A here on it, you'll see, oh, there's our data asset. I can go ahead and open it up, expand this, and I can left click on it, and nothing will happen. You can't read this right now. Can't do anything with it. The way we actually read from this data asset is very simple. We just drag out and search for get property, and this is the one, get property from object path. So we'll go ahead and select it, and now you have to tell it, what are we reading? Well, if we go back to our PDA_data asset base, you'll see we have the main struct and the static meshes. Let's go ahead and read the static meshes here. So for that, I'm just going to copy the name, make it very simple. And inside of here, inside of this property from object path node, I want to give the property name that we want to read. I'm going to paste in static meshes here. Press enter, you'll see the error goes away. And if I press A on this one, you'll see, hey, there is our static meshes. Ta-da! And if I go ahead and actually swap out this example A for example B, you'll see there's our one mesh that we had here. So just like that, we have a few different ones. So in a scenario, you could have, for example, a simple create points grid, and then using a match and set attributes, we can go ahead and assign the static meshes from here onto these points. So if you just drag out of here, do a match and set attributes. Now inside of this match and set attributes, if you press A on it and scroll to the right, you will see static meshes, and they've been randomly assigned. So now we can just use a static mesh spawner and then change the static mesh spawner to by attribute. Because we're now setting it up on an attribute, all of the meshes. So we're doing selector by attribute, and the attribute is static meshes, the exact name that we called it here. Since I already copied it, I'll just go ahead and paste it in. And you'll see that it has done it, but in my case, the spheres are just absolutely massive. So I'm just going to tweak the actual create points grid to give them a little more spacing by making the grid extents bigger and the cell size bigger. And now you can see, there we go. We now have random shapes based on the ones we've specified. And now if we wanted to, inside of the PCG itself, we can scroll down to the PCG component, go to parameter overrides, and override the data asset and swap it out for something else. And look at that. Now we have pure cubes. We have variation or pure cubes very easily just by reading the information from the data asset and having preset configurations. And this is just using the static meshes here. But that's cool. So we got static meshes, but we don't have anything else here. So how do we get the other ones? Let's go grab the structs now. Just like for the other one, we use a get property for object path. As you might think, we get a main struct here. So in the property name, we just say main struct, and you will notice that it's still throwing an error. Well, inside of the options here, aside from the property name, I want to change the struct extractor behavior. Right now it says extract root only. If I just say extract, so it'll extract anything, and now I press A on it, you'll see there's all of our attributes or variables that we put in. There's a substruct and there's two arrays, and they've come in as that. They've come in as arrays. If I want to access these, right, I can click on them and read them, or I can then go ahead and use a flatten and flatten, for example, the floats, and now press A here, and you'll see, there we go. The floats have been separated out, but of course the other stuff is all still contained. So it's now flattened them out based on the floats. Or if we want to just get those, we can use a delete attributes node, change the operation to keep only selected equal to floats. And now if I press A here, you'll see we just have those 2 floats. And now if we do a flatten from there, you'll see there's our information just on those 2 and just the floats. So now we can go ahead and modify them as we wish and use this information. So we've gotten access to the main struct. So now how do we get access to the substruct inside of the main struct? Because if you see here, right, the setup is actually not fully accessible like the floats and ints. And you cannot just flatten it like you do with a regular attribute here. Well, to do that, as you might guess, we use another get property from object path. I'll go ahead and press A here so we can see the information once it populates. But in the property name here, you don't just put in substruct. You would need to put in your main struct where it is dot your substruct. Now, it's still going to throw an error because no properties found to extract. We change the extract root only to extract. And now you'll see, hey, there's our booleans. False, true, true. And there's a few more, right? All of the ones that we had are now here. So we have now accessed a struct inside of a struct. Now, there's a big caveat here. Earlier in the tutorial, I mistyped substruct. I've gone ahead and fixed it, and I've recompiled the primary data asset, as you would. But this would not actually display me the information. It would only grab the first one. And I bring this up, not to say that, hey, I made a mistake during the tutorial. Happens all the time. But one thing you need to watch out for is when that happens, if it's grabbing the first one instead of the full array, so only the first index, it's only reading that. The fix for that is to change your primary data asset type to something else, like a regular primary data asset, for example, and then swap it back to your actual one, like your PDA underscore data asset base object reference. It'll go ahead and detach everything and then reselect it, and that has fixed the issue. So now I see all of them. So if you ever see it where you're getting one after updating your stuff, that is the fix. But maybe we get lucky and there's a hot fix for it down the line. In the meantime, though, that is the solution. So now we have access to the booleans, and just like the other one, right, we can go ahead and flatten these out. We just need to change the name of the flatten here to just at last. And now we can have access to all of the booleans, right? And we can just work off of that. So now we're getting the main static meshes, which is just a regular array. We're getting access to the main struct, which has some arrays in them. And we've got access to the substructs as well. And by the way, because the substruct is an array, right, I can add another set of booleans here, and we'll just add a few more here to example A. And now in here, we can see, hey, there's the 2. And then there's all of them flattened together. So when you flatten it, it will flatten every single one together. But that's pretty much how you read all the information. You can always use the match and set attributes to randomly assign them, as I did here. Basically, a match and set attributes will take whatever attributes you plug in and randomly assign them to the points. So this is how we're getting the random meshes. And you can assign them randomly and then use them for transforms, for movements, for rotations, for whatever you need. So at that point, they're just regular attributes. Now, hopefully this will now allow you to start using data assets a lot more in PCG because they're very good at making modular preset setups. There's not much to this project itself, but if you want to use it as a reference, it will be available on my Patreon, where you can join these wonderful people here in supporting what I do. It really means a lot. And if you'd like to join the community, the link to the Discord and everything is down in the description below, as always. If you're curious how to use the arrays you've now created inside of PCG, well, I've got a video for that. You might want to check it out right here. So you can start using your data assets with arrays and actually maybe even save them back out onto the blueprint that spawned them or any other blueprint that you'd like. Go check it out.